following program contains explicit calls to political action. If you are addicted to the tax-exempt status, Randall might not be right for you. Check with your little sister.
Come back, Maggie, I think I got something to say to you. Since you and Ronald Reagan left the stage, things are not half as cool. Socialism's getting ahead. Freedom is almost dead. Oh, Maggie, you couldn't have tried anymore.
What a blessing she was. May God grant her the joy of life eternal. God bless Margaret Thatcher.
Standing for truth in the four corners of America. Fighting for justice on the frontiers of the culture wars. And turning resistance into an art form. The only TV host arrested more times than Mahatma Gandhi, Randall Terry.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. A great hero of the 20th century in the war against communism and socialism, Margaret Thatcher, former Prime Minister of England, has left this life. May she be granted the joys of life eternal. And we are going to dedicate this program to elements of her life and hopefully learn some lessons for our battles. Don't go away, but first a quick word of wisdom from the professor.
Great Scott! The US dollar has the same trajectory as the meteorite that fell in Russia. One of my graduate students asked me, "What is that trajectory?" And I said, "Down, you blistering idiot! Down! A meteorite falls down!"
Welcome to the broadcast, friend. I can only hope, and I don't know yet, that our government has the intellectual clarity, both at the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate and with the American president that we now endure, to fly the flag at half-mast to honor Margaret Thatcher, former Prime Minister of England, who has left this life from a stroke. I am going to dedicate this entire program to her memory and perhaps even do one or two more shows on her, because the simple fact is that she was one of the most towering political figures of the last 50 years. She was the first female to lead one of the Western democracies in modern times. She was, without question and without hesitation from friend or critic, she was one of the most powerful forces in Western governance in my lifetime, and perhaps in many lifetimes to come. I'm going to play a clip just to kind of set the tone for who she was as a woman. You might know that she had the nickname of the Iron Lady. One of the things that I cherished about her as a young man when I was deeply involved in politics, following politics, yearning to be a force in politics, one of the things that I loved about her was she simply did not equivocate. She did not apologize when her principles were under attack. She simply would not flinch, and frankly would take the arguments away from her adversaries and use them to batter them verbally. So I give you this rather lengthy clip from the debate that she went through on one given day in the House of Commons. And in case you are not familiar with the British form of government, it's a blast, because when Parliament is sitting, they have what is called Question Day. And every Thursday, the House convenes, and the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's cabinet will sit on the front row, and the members of Parliament from both sides of the aisle can grill the government, including the Prime Minister, with questions. Just think for a minute, oh, the joy. if Obama, without his teleprompter, had to sit and face members of Congress every week who asked questions about his policies or the fruit of his policies or what he was doing with someone's money. So I give you this clip both by way of education of the English process, but perhaps more importantly, for you to see this magnificent woman at work.
I give way to the honourable gentleman.
There is no doubt that the Prime Minister has in many ways achieved substantial success for the economy. There is one statistic that I understand is not, however, challengeable, and that is that over her 11 years, the gap between the richest 10% and the poorest 10% in this country has widened substantially. That's right. How can she say at the end of her chapter of British politics that she can justify many people in a constituency such as mine being relatively much poorer off, much less well housed, and much less well provided than it was in 1979? Surely she accepts that is not a record that she or any Prime Minister can be proud of.
Mr. Speaker, all levels of income are better off than they were in 1979. But what the honourable member is saying is that he would rather the poor were poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That way you will never create the wealth for better social services as we have. And what a policy! Yes, he would rather have the poor poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That is the Liberal policy. Yes, it came out. He didn't intend it to, but he did. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful. The Prime Minister is aware that I detest every single one of her domestic policies and have never hid that.
And I think that the honourable gentleman knows that I have the same contempt for his socialist policies as the people of East Europe who have experienced it have it for theirs. I think I must have hit the right nail on the head when I pointed out that the logic of those policies are they'd rather have the poor poorer. Once they start to talk about the gap, they'd rather the gap were that. Down here. That. Not that. But that. So long as the gap is smaller, they'd rather have the poor poorer. You do not create wealth and opportunity that way. You do not create a property-owning democracy that way.
Isn't that fun? I mean, it's just fun to watch. She doesn't equivocate. She doesn't apologize. She runs right at the argument and prevails, has people laughing, has... You know what? Here, I've got to take a break. When we come back, what I want to do is start to weave her life and the principles she stood for economically and kind of fast forward them to where we are as a republic right now. Because a strong opposition, except for Rand Paul and a few others like him, Rubio down in Florida, the Tea Party movement is in great danger. Conservatism is all but in tatters. And boy, oh boy, could we use somebody with the clarity and the courage of Margaret Thatcher. Don't go away. How would you like to be able to reach hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of potential customers with your product or your company or your web-based business? Well, you can do that right here on this show. Every single day, we get phone calls or letters or orders online from states all over the country where people are watching this television show. Right now, we are seen in 45 cities at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time every night, and then a rerun again at 12:30 midnight. You can reach them using this show at advertising rates that are so inexpensive, it would blow your mind. So, if you're interested, contact us at the phone number that you see on the screen or the email address, and we can talk about how you can grow your business and help support this show.
Moments with Moses. If you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command you this day, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you.
Welcome back to the program, friend. Former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, dead at 87 from a stroke. She was one of England's first members of Parliament in the House of Commons who was a female. By the way, if you want to see an interesting remembrance of her life, now would be the time to rent Iron Lady. Meryl Streep plays Margaret Thatcher. It focuses a little bit too much on her later years, but it's a tremendous overview of her life and her courage as a woman, as a mom, as a member of Parliament, and then finally as Prime Minister. As I said, she was one of the first female members of Parliament to be elected. As a child, her dad was a lay preacher with the Methodist Church in England. He also owned and operated a grocery store. As a young female, he would take her to Conservative Party meetings where he was an activist. He was a political activist in the Conservative Party. And he encouraged her to do what in those days was almost unheard of, namely to ask questions, to participate. In the early 50s, she ran in completely unwinnable races as a candidate for the House of Commons, but it put her name out there. And then in 1959, she won her first race when the Conservative Party decided to let her run in a safe district where the Conservative would win. She was, within a decade, elevated to what they said was the lowest rung of the party machinery and the government, but it gave her a foot in the door. And when, I believe it was 1971, they had to start to suspend some of the socialist programs, she was given the unpleasant task of ending the funding of milk for school children. Now, we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about WIC and some more American WIC, women, infant, and children, in a later segment. But the phrase, Thatcher, the milk snatcher, that was what the British press rolled out day after day. Protests, people who wanted free milk for children were berating her. But as it turns out, that press made her name a household word. And because she did not equivocate on the need of England to fund, or rather to defund socialism, it actually helped propel her to become Prime Minister. Always remember that. Sometimes your adversaries will be the greatest lift beneath your wing if you don't equivocate on the principle that is at stake. Now, let me roll this clip because it would do well for conservatives in America to hear these words and to place them where they belong, with us. This is Margaret Thatcher on conservatives winning elections.
Mr. President, 12 years ago, I first stood on this platform as leader of the Conservative Party. Now, one or two things have changed since 1975. In that year, we were still groaning under Labour's so-called social contract. People said we should never be able to govern again. Remember how we'd all been lectured about political impossibility. You couldn't be a conservative and sound like a conservative and win an election, they said. And you certainly couldn't win an election and then act like a conservative and win another election. And this was absolutely beyond dispute. You couldn't win 2 elections and go on behaving like a conservative and yet win a 3rd election.
So you can see, well, can we run as true conservatives? No, we have to hide our true feelings. John Boehner, these squish Republicans who say they're conservatives, but they're really not. And then can we win an election and govern as conservatives? Yes, but if you do, you'll never win re-election. Oh, really? They won a 2nd election and then a 3rd election. And she ended up being the longest serving prime minister in the 20th century. one of the longest serving prime ministers in all of English history. And she didn't flinch on her beliefs and on her policies. I've got to take a quick break. When we come back, more footage from Margaret Thatcher's life and how we can learn from some of her actions and words. Don't go away. Friend, you need to get this book, We Won't Get Fooled Again. Listen to this. I came to the conclusion that most folks were left over from the Reagan era who were no longer warriors, but are now either too old or unhealthy and had compromised and become comfortable with the Republican establishment. They turned these organizations pretty much into direct mail fundraising fronts and were making tons of money and living the good life in beautiful mansions. The conservative movement had transformed itself from a very dynamic, principled organization in the Reagan years to a bunch of compromising, useless, and ineffective money-making machines. I'm reading to you from the new blockbuster book, We Won't Get Fooled Again, that names names, shows organizations, shows how they say that they're Christian, but they betray Christ, they betray biblical principles in the public square, and we are funding them. Go to the website, call us on the phone, and order it today. I'll send it to you for free if you want. God bless you. They sacrificed their sons and their daughters to the demons. They poured out innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. Welcome back to the program, friend. Public money. What is public money? The General Treasury. Well, let's listen to Margaret Thatcher give us Government Economics 101.
One of the great debates of our time is about how much of your money should be spent by the state and how much you should keep to spend on your family. Let us never forget this fundamental truth. The state has no source of money other than the money people earn themselves. If the state wishes to spend more, it can do so only by borrowing your savings or by taxing you more. And it's no good thinking that someone else will pay. That someone else is you. There is no such thing as public money. There is only taxpayers' money. Prosperity won't come by inventing more and more lavish public expenditure programs. You don't grow richer by ordering another checkbook from the bank. And no nation ever grew more prosperous by taxing its citizens beyond their capacity to pay. We have a duty to make sure that every penny piece we raise in taxation is spent wisely and well. For it is our party which is dedicated to good housekeeping. Indeed, I wouldn't mind betting that if Mr. Gladstone were alive today, he'd be reapplying to join the Conservative Party. Protecting the taxpayer's purse, protecting the public services. These are our two great tasks, and their demands have to be reconciled. How very pleasant it would be, how very popular to say, spend more on this, expand more on that. And of course we all have our favorite causes. I know I do. But someone has to add up the figures. Every business has to do it, every housewife has to do it, every government should do it, and this one will.
Don't you just wish that President Obama was forced to watch that? To just sit at the knee of Margaret Thatcher videos for a day or two? I know he doesn't have the stomach for it. He doesn't have the intellectual capacity, I believe, to actually retain it and learn from it. He's a socialist through and through. But the end of the matter, folks, is that The money that the government spends is our money. And the more they create between the work class, us, and those who live off the worker class, the more the divide is going to happen, and we are racing towards economic oblivion. All right? We are racing towards economic oblivion. She pulled England out of a 30-year tailspin that was leading to their internal economic collapse. We, on the other hand, aren't learning from their lessons, and we're plunging headlong with bigger debt and a bigger calamity coming. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, apply this to you and to I in the fights and the battles that we're facing right now. Don't go away. Friend, you need to get this book. We Won't Get Fooled Again. Listen to this. I came to the conclusion that most folks were left over from the Reagan era who were no longer warriors, but are now either too old or unhealthy, and had compromised and become comfortable with the Republican establishment. They turned these organizations pretty much into direct mail fundraising fronts and were making tons of money and living the good life in beautiful mansions. The conservative movement had transformed itself from a very dynamic, principled organization in the Reagan years to a bunch of compromising, useless, and ineffective money-making machines. I'm reading to you from the new blockbuster book, We Won't Get Fooled Again, that names names, shows organizations, shows how they say that they're Christian, but they betray Christ, they betray biblical principles in the public square, and we are funding them. Go to the website, call us on the phone, and order it today. I'll send it to you for free if you want. God bless you. Democracy is a very bad form of government, except for all the others that have been tried from time to time. Sir Winston Churchill. Welcome back to the program. Truth has within it the seeds of its own victory. Lies have within them the seeds of their own destruction. However, if those who sow lies have more courage, more dedication, let's say like Marxists following Lenin in the philosophies of Marx or Stalin, for a season, lies and oppression can choke the life out of truth and freedom. And what's necessary for truth to prevail is courage in her guardians. In other words, truth is unchanging, but who will herald the truth? Who will defend the truth? In Margaret Thatcher, we saw a woman who was unyielding in her insistence that these massive trade unions that had strangled much of England's economy must have their strength broken. She was insistent that these huge companies that the British government had stolen a generation earlier from private enterprise be returned to private hands. And systematically, she dismantled much of England's socialist welfare state and let private enterprise be private enterprise. And because of her stands, because of her policies, because of what she did, she was hated, vilified, mocked, demonized by people within her own country. And of course, when she was mocked and berated, she started to cry. She broke down. She would have a hissy fit and would pound the table. No, that's not what she did. She stuck out her jaw and she went forward. I tell you this because there is a difference between persecution and bad press. The apostles weren't worried about bad editorials in the Jerusalem Times. They were worried about being crucified upside down, or having their skin flayed off, or being decapitated, or being dismembered. In other words, we become so soft that we think that verbal condemnation is the equivalent of true persecution, and it's not. Now, Jesus knew that we were weak, and he said, "Blessed are you when men persecute you, revile you, cast your name out as evil, say all manner of evil against you falsely." In other words, they verbally berate you. Because those words can hurt our heart and our soul. But it's sticks and stones that break our bones and that can make martyrs out of us. So my point is this: Have a healthy and proper perspective of what it's going to take for the truth to prevail over lies. We're going to have to be courageous, and we're going to have the fortitude of Margaret Thatcher and others like her when we defend the truth. And remember, if you get out of this thing alive and they haven't killed you, you're not a martyr, all right? We've got more to talk about with Maggie Thatcher in the upcoming shows. I hope you'll join me. Until then, God bless you.